posted on our/TrueOffMyChest. How would you feel if you spent 5 years paying for a house, only to find out, at a wedding, in front of hundreds of people, that your parents had gifted it to someone else? Without telling you? Because that's exactly what happened to me. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to go no contact with my own parents. No matter how much they favored my sister, no matter how many times they overlooked me, I always told myself, they're still my family. But there's only so much betrayal a person can take. Every month, without fail, I sent them money to cover the mortgage, thinking I was helping them stay afloat. I never asked for anything in return. I did it because that's what a good daughter does, right? Then, at my sister's wedding, my parents proudly announced that they were giving her the house. The house I had been paying for. I wasn't even given a heads up. Not a single word. I sat there, frozen, while the room erupted into applause. My sister cried happy tears, my parents beamed with pride, and I felt like I had been sucker punched. I wish I could say this was the first time they had shown blatant favoritism, but it wasn't. This was just the moment I finally woke up. I don't think I'm wrong for cutting them off, but a small part of me still wonders, am I overreacting? Let me tell you the whole story. And if you think I made the right choice, support this post and help me get this out there. Maybe someone else needs to hear it too. If you're still here reading this, this is just one of many shocking real-life stories we've uncovered. Some are even worse than this. If you want to hear more stories about family betrayals, revenge, and unbelievable drama, make sure to follow Reddit True Vault. Trust me, this story is just the beginning. I never thought I'd be in this position, but here I am. Looking back, I don't know why I was so shocked. The truth is, my parents have always made it clear that Hannah was their priority. The wedding, the house, it was just the final slap in the face. But the signs were always there. I was just too naive to see them for what they were. I used to think that if I worked hard enough, if I was good enough, maybe one day they would see me the way they saw Hannah. Maybe one day, my dad would ruffle my hair and say, "I'm proud of you, kid." Maybe my mom would hug me tight, the way she hugged Hannah when she was sad, and whisper, "You mean the world to me." But that day never came. When I was 8, I won first place in a school art contest. I remember running home, beaming, my little hands clutching the certificate so tightly it crumpled at the edges. I burst through the door, holding it up like a trophy, waiting for their faces to light up. My mom barely looked at it before saying, "That's nice, honey. Can you help Hannah with her spelling homework?" That same year, Hannah came home with a participation ribbon from a preschool event. My parents framed it and put it right in the living room. My award? It got lost somewhere in the junk drawer. At 12, I saved up for months doing chores, skipping out on small treats, just to buy a bike. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was mine. My reward for my hard work. One day, I came home to find Hannah riding it. "She's your little sister," my mom told me. "You should be happy to share with her." A few months later, for no reason at all, they bought Hannah a brand new pink bike, twice the price of mine. At 14, I spent weeks preparing for a school play. I wasn't the lead, but I had lines, and I wanted them to be perfect. My parents promised to come. I searched the audience that night, heart pounding, only to realize they weren't there. Later, my mom casually mentioned they had taken Hannah out for ice cream because she was feeling sad that day. They didn't even apologize. I cried myself to sleep that night, wishing, just once, that I could be the daughter they dropped everything for. By the time I graduated high school, I had learned to expect less. But nothing prepared me for college. When I graduated, my parents handed me a card with $50 inside. No party, no big congratulations, just "good job, honey," and that was it. I told myself it was fine. That money was tight. Then, 5 years later, Hannah moved into her first apartment, and my parents threw her a huge housewarming party. They bought her new furniture, filled her fridge with groceries, and even paid her rent for the first few months. They went on and on about how proud they were of her, how she was finally all grown up. I remember sitting in the corner of that party, watching them fuss over her, hearing my mom say, "We just want to make sure she's taken care of." I had moved out at 18. No one threw me a party. No one paid my rent. No one even checked if I had groceries. It was the same when I turned 21. I invited my parents to a birthday dinner, just a small get-together. They said they couldn't come because Hannah had a volleyball game. Not a championship, not even an important match, just a regular game. They didn't even seem to realize how much it hurt. When I got my first big promotion, I called them, hoping, just once, I'd hear real pride in their voices. My mom's response, "That's nice, honey. Oh, did you hear? Hannah is thinking about taking yoga classes. We're so excited for her." It was like this every single time. I used to lay awake at night wondering what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I enough? What was it about Hannah that made her so easy to love? I told myself it didn't matter, that I was independent, that I didn't need their validation. But deep down, I knew I had never been their priority, and I never would be. I guess I should explain a little more about my family before I get into what happened at Hannah's wedding. Maybe then, everything will make more sense. I grew up in Seattle with my parents, Richard and Linda Harper, and my younger sister, Hannah. Our family lived in a modest, two-story house in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. At least, it was supposed to be. Looking back, I don't know if I ever truly felt like I belonged there. Hannah was always the center of their world. And me? I was just there, the responsible one. The one who never asked for too much, who handled things on her own. The one they knew would always be fine, no matter how little attention they gave me. Even on the most important day of my life, my wedding day, they barely showed up. When I married Egan, I thought, for once, they would be there for me, that they would celebrate me. But they treated it like an obligation. My mom nitpicked every little detail. My dad barely spoke to me. There were no heartfelt speeches, no emotional moments. Just stiff smiles and polite nods, like they were attending a distant relative's event. I tried to push it aside, but when I looked across the room and saw the way they lit up around Hannah, laughing, doting on her, making sure she was comfortable, I felt something in me crack. That night, after the reception, I sat in our hotel room, still in my wedding dress, sobbing into my hands. Egan sat beside me, holding me as I broke down. Why do they love her more than me? I choked out between gasps. What's wrong with me? Egan didn't try to feed me empty reassurances. He just let me cry, rubbing slow circles on my back until my breathing steadied. And then, in the quiet, he said something that changed everything. Julia, you keep trying to earn something that should have been yours from the start. I blinked at him. Love isn't a reward. It's not something you should have to fight for. If they can only care about you when you're useful to them, that's not love. That's control. I didn't know it then, but that was the first crack in the foundation. The first time I really thought about my relationship with my family, what it was and what it wasn't. Of course, I wasn't ready to walk away yet. I still held on to hope, convincing myself things would get better. But then came Hannah's wedding. And with it, the moment that shattered any illusions I had left. I should have known something was off from the beginning. The moment Egan and I arrived at the venue, I felt it. A strange, sinking feeling in my gut, like I was walking into something I wasn't prepared for. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that today wasn't about me. It was Hannah's big day, and I was going to be the supportive sister. That's what I'd always been, after all. The wedding itself was beautiful. Expensive, extravagant. Everything perfectly curated down to the floral arrangements and personalized cocktail napkins. And a third of it was paid for by Egan and me. We had already given Hannah $10,000 as a wedding gift, and when my parents casually mentioned they were a little short on some final costs, Egan stepped in without hesitation. He knew how much I wanted to keep the peace. I told myself it was worth it, that helping my family, being generous, was the right thing to do. But as I sat there, watching my parents dote on Hannah, fussing over every little detail, making sure she was comfortable and she was happy, I couldn't help but remember my own wedding. How different everything had felt. I had convinced myself it didn't matter, that this was just how things were. Then came the speeches. Linda stood up, and the room went quiet. She started thanking everyone for coming, talking about how proud she was of Hannah, how she had always been such a light in their lives. I sat there, waiting, hoping for some acknowledgement that they had another daughter sitting right there. But nothing. And then, just like that, she dropped the bombshell. Somewhere in the middle of her speech, she started talking about Hannah and Jake's future, about wanting to give them something meaningful to start their new life together. Then she held up some papers. That's when I heard it. They were giving Hannah and Jake the house, our family home, the house I had been paying the mortgage on for the past 5 years. The applause was instant. People gasped, cheered, clapped. I just sat there. The room erupted in applause. Gasps, cheers. People clapped and cooed about how generous my parents were, how lucky Hannah and Jake were. I sat there, frozen. Egan went rigid beside me. I stared at my parents, then at Hannah, waiting for someone to laugh, to say it was a joke. But it wasn't. My parents were beaming. And Hannah? She wasn't even surprised. She was crying happy tears, hugging Jake, looking at my parents with nothing but pure gratitude. The house, My parents' house. The house I had been paying the mortgage on for the past 5 years. And they hadn't even told me. Not once. Not a single conversation. Not a warning. Not a heads up. Nothing. I felt Egan squeeze my hand. It was the only thing keeping me grounded in that moment. I plastered a smile on my face. I clapped when I was supposed to. I let Hannah pull me into a hug. Let my mom kiss my cheek. Let my dad pat my shoulder like nothing was wrong. Because it was Hannah's wedding. Because I refused to be the problem. Because, for one last time, I was still trying to be the good daughter. I barely remember the rest of the night. The music, the dancing, the endless congratulations to Hannah and Jake. I went through the motions, pretending I was fine. Smiling, nodding, laughing at the right moments. But inside, I was crumbling. Not because of the house itself. It was never about the house. It was about what it meant. It was confirmation, blatant, undeniable proof that I was nothing more than a resource to them. A wallet. Someone they could rely on financially, but never truly consider. I was never their priority. I never would be. It wasn't until we got to the car that I finally broke. Egan hadn't said much all night, but the moment we slid into the seats, he turned to me, his jaw clenched. "Are you okay?" That's all it took. The dam broke. I sobbed. I sobbed in a way I hadn't since I was a child, gasping for air, shaking. It felt like something inside me had cracked open, like every hurt I had buried over the years was clawing its way out all at once. "I don't care about the house," I choked out. "I don't care about the money." But they didn't even tell me. Egan. They didn't even think about me. Egan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I know. His voice was low, controlled, but I could hear the anger simmering beneath it. Hannah knew. I whispered, more to myself than to him. She wasn't surprised at all. They planned this. They planned it, and they didn't say a word to me. Egan reached over, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "They don't deserve you." I let out a watery laugh, shaking my head. "That's the problem, Egan. I don't think they ever even saw me as someone to deserve." We sat there in silence for a long time. And in that silence, I realized something. I wasn't just hurt. I was done. Posted on our /TrueOffMyChest. 3 weeks after the wedding, my mom called. "We're having a family dinner this weekend. Hannah and Jake will be there. You and Egan should come." Just like that. No mention of the wedding. No mention of the house. No acknowledgement of what they had done. And like an idiot, a small part of me still thought maybe, just maybe, this was an olive branch. Maybe they had realized how badly they had hurt me. Maybe they wanted to apologize. I should have known better. The moment we arrived, I knew nothing had changed. Hannah was glowing, laughing as she talked about her honeymoon. My parents looked comfortable in her house, like it had always belonged to her. Like they had never even considered that it was once mine too. Dinner was the usual routine, my parents talking, me listening. Most of it was about Hannah. How happy they were for her. How Jake was such a great guy. Then, out of nowhere, they dropped it. They had decided to move into my vacation home. Not asked. Not suggested. Decided. I froze. They spoke about it so casually, as if it had been the plan all along. My dad mentioned how it was the perfect size for them. My mom talked about how they needed a fresh start now that Hannah had the house. They didn't even ask if it was okay. They assumed I would just let them have it. I don't know what snapped in me first. The way my mother smiled, like she expected me to agree. The way my dad was already talking about moving logistics. Or the way Hannah smirked, sitting back in her chair like she had won something. But suddenly, I felt hot. Like something inside me was boiling over after years of being pushed aside, overlooked, and dismissed. I slammed my hands on the table so hard the plates rattled. "Are you serious?" My voice shook, and before I could stop myself, years of resentment came spilling out. I don't remember every word I said. I just remember the feeling. The way my throat burned as I yelled, the way my hands trembled, the way no one interrupted me because they had never seen me like this before. I told them everything. Everything. I told them how I had spent my whole life being second to Hannah. How I had paid for their damn house, only to have it handed over to her like I never existed. How they had made me feel invisible for years, and how this moment, was the final proof that I had never mattered to them the way she did. I told them that they were not moving into my home, that I didn't care what happened to them, that they had made their choice when they gave away the house I paid for. My mom was crying. My dad was red with anger. Hannah was staring at me like I had lost my mind. And maybe I had. I was shaking so badly that I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt Egan's arms around me, pulling me in, holding me like he could physically keep me from falling apart. I don't remember leaving the house. I don't remember walking to the car. All I remember is the way Egan held me. The way he wiped my tears away, ran his hands through my hair, whispered over and over again that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't wrong, that I didn't deserve any of this. And for the first time, I believed him. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. A week after the dinner, I was finally starting to feel like myself again. For the first time in my life, I had set a boundary with my parents and actually stuck to it. No guilt. No second guessing. Just relief. At least, that's what I thought. I was at work when the security alert came through. Motion detected, front door. At first, I ignored it. The vacation home was 3 hours away, and no one was supposed to be there. Probably just an animal or a glitch. But then another alert followed. Front door unlocked. My stomach dropped. I pulled up the camera feed, half expecting to see a delivery driver or a maintenance worker. Instead, I saw my parents, dragging suitcases inside, making themselves comfortable. For a second, I just stared. I had explicitly told them no. I had made it crystal clear that they were not moving in. And yet, here they were. I felt Egan's hand on my back before I even realized he had moved beside me. I must have made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob, because he gently took my phone, glanced at the screen, and exhaled slowly. "Call the cops," he said, voice steady but firm. I didn't even hesitate. By the time we arrived, the police were already there, speaking to my parents outside. My mom was crying. My dad looked furious. Egan didn't leave my side. His hand found mine, fingers squeezing gently, grounding me. When I took a deep breath and walked toward the officers, he was right there beside me, silent but solid. I told the officers the truth. This is my property. They do not live here. They do not have permission to be here. My parents, of course, played the victims. They said they were my parents, that they had nowhere else to go, that I was cruel for treating them this way. My dad argued that it wasn't really trespassing, that they had a key, but it was trespassing, because I never gave them permission. The officer asked if I wanted to press charges. I thought about it. For years, I had let them take from me my time, my money, my peace of mind. And now, they had broken into my house, expecting me to just accept it like I always had. I told the officer that I wouldn't press charges this time, but if they ever tried this again, I would. My parents looked at me like I had betrayed them, like I was the villain, but I didn't care anymore. The officers escorted them off the property, warning them that if they came back, they would be arrested. Egan didn't say anything as we watched them drive away. He just pulled me into his arms, held me close, and pressed a kiss to the top of my head. "You okay?" he murmured. I wasn't sure how to answer that, but for the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. Posted on r/TrueOffMyChest. I should have known it wouldn't end there. For a few days, things were quiet. No calls. No unexpected visits. No drama. Just silence. And then, one morning, I woke up to dozens of messages. My phone was blowing up. Texts, missed calls, Facebook notifications. Confused, I opened my inbox, and that's when I saw it. My mother had taken the drama to Facebook. The post was long, dramatic, full of words like betrayal and abandonment. She talked about how she and my father had given their whole lives for their children, only to be cast aside like garbage when they needed help the most. She painted a picture of two helpless, elderly parents being cruelly thrown out by their ungrateful daughter. The comments were just as bad. People, extended family, old friends, even some distant acquaintances, were furious, calling me selfish, heartless, a disgrace. Some went as far as to say that no child should ever turn their back on their parents, no matter what. I just sat there, staring at my screen, feeling numb. I had expected backlash, but seeing people I barely knew jump in to call me a terrible person, that stung. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. I had spent my whole life letting things go, taking the high road, swallowing my anger and pretending it didn't hurt. And maybe I would have done it again, except this time, I wasn't alone. Egan took one look at my face and knew. "You're not letting this slide," he said firmly. "Not anymore." I hesitated. "What's the point?" I muttered. "People will believe whatever they want to believe." Egan shook his head. "Not if you tell them the truth." And he was right. So, for the first time in my life, I fought back. I opened Facebook and started typing. "Since my mother has decided to make this public, I guess I have no choice but to share my side of the story." And then, I laid everything out. For 5 years, I paid the mortgage on my parents' house. They couldn't afford it, so I stepped in. Not because they asked, but because I wanted to help. Because I thought that's what family did for each other. When Hannah got married, I gave her $10,000 and covered a third of her wedding expenses. Again, because I thought that's what family did. At the wedding, my parents announced, without telling me, that they were giving the house to Hannah and Jake. The house I had been paying for. The house I had assumed was still my parents' home. I found out at the same time as every other guest. 3 weeks later, they told me they were moving into my vacation home. Not asked, told. When I refused, they called me selfish. A week after that, they broke in, used an old key, brought suitcases, moved in like they owned the place. I had to call the police to get them out. And now, because I refuse to be manipulated anymore, my mother has taken to Facebook to tell everyone what a terrible daughter I am. Funny how she left all these details out, huh? I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I hit post. The response was immediate. At first, there were still a few defenders. A few people tried to say, but they're your parents, or families should stick together. But then, others started asking questions. Wait, you paid their mortgage for 5 years. They gave your sister the house without telling you, and then tried to take another one of your properties? The tide shifted. People who had blindly sided with my mother started backtracking. Relatives who had initially called me ungrateful suddenly had nothing to say. And the best part? Hannah stayed silent. Not one word. I don't know if it was because she felt guilty or because she didn't want to drag herself into the mess, but either way, it was telling. Within hours, my mother deleted her post. She didn't reach out. Neither did my father, but I didn't need them to. Because for the first time, I didn't feel like the one who had to justify myself. I had told the truth, and that was enough. Posted on r/TrueOffMyChest. For the first time in weeks, my life was quiet. No calls, no guilt-tripping messages, no surprise visits. And honestly, it felt good. I wasn't waiting for the next disaster. I wasn't holding my breath, expecting my parents to pull another stunt. It was like I had finally broken free from a weight I didn't even realize I had been carrying. But of course, the story didn't end there. A few weeks after the Facebook drama, I started getting messages from relatives. Some were supportive, saying they had no idea what had been going on and that they were sorry for jumping to conclusions. Others were less apologetic, still clinging to the idea that I had an obligation to my parents, no matter what they had done. But the most interesting messages? They came from people I barely even knew. A former neighbor, an old friend of my mother's, even one of Hannah's co-workers. Apparently, after my parents got kicked out of my vacation home, they tried to move in with Hannah and Jake. And Hannah, their golden child, their beloved daughter, the one they gave everything to, said no. According to what I heard, it wasn't even a discussion. She didn't hesitate. She told them flat out that she and Jake needed their space, that having them there wouldn't work, and that they'd have to find another solution. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a flicker of dark satisfaction reading that. They gave her everything. And when it came time for her to return the favor, she didn't even entertain the idea. I wondered if, in that moment, they finally understood. If they finally saw the difference between me, who had spent 5 years paying for their home, and Hannah, who wouldn't even spare them a guest room. I doubted it. With no other options, they ended up renting a small apartment in the city. My mom had to go back to work to help cover the rent. My dad, from what I heard, wasn't handling it well. And me? I didn't reach out. I didn't check in. I didn't offer help. I didn't ask how they were doing. I had done my part. More than my part. And I was done. I had their numbers blocked, so I didn't have to see their messages. I didn't have to hear their excuses or their attempts at guilt-tripping me. But then, a few nights ago, I got a notification, a Facebook message, from my mother. I know I was wrong. I'm sorry. Please call me. That's all it said. No long-winded excuses. No blaming me for everything. Just that. I stared at it for a long time. And then, without overthinking, without hesitation, I deleted it. Because maybe one day, I'll be ready to hear her out. Maybe one day, I'll be willing to have that conversation. Maybe one day, I'll find it in myself to forgive. But not today. Today, I'm learning how to put myself first. There are things I never thought I would do. Cutting off my own parents was one of them. But in the end, I realized something. Walking away wasn't selfish. It was necessary. For years, I convinced myself that if I just gave enough, they would finally love me the way I had always wanted. But no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. Because real love isn't something you have to pay for. If you're reading this and it sounds familiar, if you're always the one giving while others just take, remember this. You don't have to endure it. Family isn't an excuse for manipulation or entitlement. You don't owe anyone your happiness just because they share your DNA. Put yourself first. You deserve peace. And that brings us to the end of Julia's story, a story that makes us question the true meaning of family. Not everyone is lucky enough to be born into love and support, and sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to walk away. What do you think? Should Julia ever forgive her parents someday? Or was she right to leave them behind for good? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear more real-life stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to Reddit True Vault.